North Korea is a vivid example of a totalitarian country. An unchanging dynasty of dictators, lack of freedom of speech, constant threats to destroy neighbors. This is everyday life for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 2006, words were backed up by real deeds. North Korea conducted its first nuclear tests. Since then, its nuclear potential has only grown with terrifying progression. How did a sanctioned country get nuclear weapons? Will it be able to strike another country with it? For example, the United States? And what does Pakistan have to do with it? You will find out all about it in this video. Let's start with why North Korea is a separate quasi-state. That is, one that is almost entirely dependent on another country. It seems like a moon and its planet Earth. At the beginning of the 20th century, the territory of modern Korea was occupied by militaristic Japan. They introduced a tough policy of assimilation there, aimed at suppressing Korean identity and losing national consciousness. Koreans were deprived of the right to freely express their opinions. The Korean language and cultural traditions were oppressed. Of course, the Koreans put up armed resistance to the occupiers. The communist forces, concentrated in northern Korea, were particularly active in this. The mountainous terrain was ideal for guerrilla operations and also made it possible to paralyze the extraction of minerals, which this region was also rich in. One of the leaders of the guerrilla movements was Kim Il-sung. More precisely, this is his nom de guerre. At birth, his name was Jin Ji-chen. In 1941, fleeing from the Japanese forces, he crossed the border into the USSR, where his squad was captured by Soviet intelligence. Later, after ideological retraining and military training, he became the captain of the 88th Brigade of the Soviet Army. After the nuclear bombing, Japan surrendered, resulting in the USSR ensuring the establishment of a communist regime in North Korea, while the US lobbied for an anti-communist regime in the South. This ideological and geopolitical confrontation turned out to be the root causes of the war in the future, called the Korean War. During this conflict, which lasted 3 years, the forces of the world superpowers, the USSR and China on the one hand, and the forces of the UN and the USA on the other, clashed on the territory of the Korean Peninsula. During the active hostilities, both sides suffered huge losses, and most tragically, among the civilian population. During the course of events, both sides of the conflict almost won. At first, North Korea reached the south of Korea, the city of Busan, but later they were repulsed by an American counterattack. They were even able to capture the capital, Pyongyang, but at this point, the Chinese People's Army used its power. As a result, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. From that moment on, the two parts of the same people followed completely different paths of development. The North became communist, while the South became capitalist. One of the key aspects of the regime that Kim Il-sung created was the de facto usurpation of power. The Communist Party of North Korea had no real power inside the country, and this affected relations with the USSR. In fact, the USSR created an artificial state but could not influence it. In the mid-1950s, as a factor in supporting South Korea, the United States deployed nuclear missiles in the country. Thus, they kept China, the east of the USSR, and of course, North Korea under the threat of a nuclear strike. Kim Il-sung didn't like it, to put it mildly. He turned to the Communist Party of the USSR with a similar request, but it was rejected. Stalin no longer trusted Comrade Kim, so he did not want to take risks and worsen the already difficult relations with the outside world. However, after Stalin's death, the USSR made concessions. In the 1960s, the Soviets handed over the IRT-2000 nuclear reactor to the Koreans. It worked on another type of radioactive elements and could not immediately serve as a testing ground for nuclear tests. The key word is immediately. At the same time, negotiations were underway with China, which conducted its nuclear tests in 1963, the so-called Project 596. But even here, Kim Il-sung was doomed for a failure. The Chinese dictator Mao Zedong also did not want to strengthen his eastern neighbor. But North Korea did not give up. In 1974, the DPRK became a member of the IAEA, the international organization that controls the nuclear industry and prevents the use of peaceful atoms for military purposes. What's the logic, you ask? It's simple. The IAEA archives contained model copies of all nuclear power plants of those times, which allowed North Korea leadership to copy what suited them. Of course, the international community drew conclusions and did not allow such embarrassments again. Do you believe it? Hell no! In 1985, North Korea signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They promised to abandon attempts to acquire nuclear weapons, while the USSR was to help build several nuclear power plants for them. And most importantly, the United States were withdrawing their nuclear weapons from South Korea. But the Koreans managed to cheat again. In the early 1990s, the IAEA decided to conduct an unscheduled inspection of the nuclear industry in North Korea. But they were simply not allowed to access a number of strategic facilities. An international scandal broke out. According to the memoirs of U.S. Secretary of Defense at that time, William Perry, then President Bill Clinton was ready to give the order to destroy the nuclear reactor in Yongbyon, North Korea's largest nuclear facility. But the United States did not dare to do so, fearing a large number of civilian casualties. It's interesting to read this now when Kim Jong Un, the grandson of Kim Il-sung, threatens to destroy America along with all its inhabitants, isn't it? As a result of the negotiations, Korea promised not to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but withdrew from the IAEA. There, they've learned for themselves everything they wanted. But all this was not enough to complete the full cycle of creating nuclear weapons. Help came, oddly enough, from the West. But not from the one you thought. Pakistan, another Islamic authoritarian country, successfully conducted its nuclear tests in 1998. So it was Pakistan that secretly transferred to North Korea units for uranium enrichment, while Korea supplied Pakistan with copies of Soviet Elbrus missiles under the name Nodong. According to the CIA, Abdul Qadir Khan, the father of the Pakistani nuclear bomb, personally helped set up production in the DPRK. Neighboring states tried to negotiate with their sub-nuclear neighbor to stop development, but as it turned out, North Korea was simply misleading everyone and dragging on time. Officially, the North Korean authorities announced the development of nuclear weapons on February 10, 2005, and 11 months later, they detonated their first bomb in the Pangyak Gorge. A magnitude 4 earthquake was recorded at the site of the explosion. The power itself was estimated by independent experts at 0.5 kilotons. For comparison, the bomb on Hiroshima had a power of 15 kilotons. However, the main fact was something else. North Korea had a nuclear bomb that it could theoretically drop on its neighbors. That is why countries such as South Korea, Japan, and China held urgent talks. Japan and China had not met at all before this for about 5 years. This precedent was so important for them. At the convened UN session, all members of the Security Council condemned and prohibited the transfer of any materials to Korea that could help it create nuclear weapons. But it was already too late. In the next 10 years, North Korea conducted another 5 nuclear tests. In 2017, Kim Jong Un, the third of the Kim dynasty, announced testing of the hydrogen bomb. Seeing a topic on which you can brag and at the same time save the world, then President Donald Trump got down to business. In June 2018, he held talks with Kim Jong Un, shaking hands with the dictator for the first time in the history of negotiations. The results were stunning. North Korea refused further tests, and the US, in return, canceled all sanctions. But the miracle did not happen. Kim Jong Un was just dragging time again. During the next two negotiations between the two leaders in 2018 and 2019, the countries failed to agree on any concessions. After the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, North Korea further intensified its experimental tests of intercontinental ballistic missiles. After all, what's the use of a bomb, even a nuclear one, if you can't launch it a long distance? The basis of North Korea's missile forces are old Soviet and Chinese ballistic missiles. But this does not mean they cannot improve them. Based on those technologies, Korean scientists are diligently improving strike capabilities at different ranges. So, in 2012, North Korea was able to launch its own satellite into orbit. In just the last 2 years alone, the Koreans have conducted real tests of missiles, both with a range of 250 kilometers, 155 miles, the so-called Hwasong-1 and Hwasong-2 cruise missiles, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, Hwasong-18. The launches of the latter missiles caused particular concern in the US. After all, the declared range of such a missile is more than 8,000 miles. This allows such missiles to strike at the territory of the United States. In addition, North Korea is actively sharing its refinements with regimes allied to it. Thus, Iran and Pakistan in the 2010s received a certain number of Hwasong 5, 6, and 7 missiles. And during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it handed over an unspecified number of Hwasong 11 missiles to the aggressor, which are similar to the Russian Iskander ballistic missiles. So, will the DPRK ever dare to use nuclear weapons against the US? Most likely not, since after such a step, only one Korea will remain, the southern one, as the nuclear potential of the United States is much greater. At the same time, of course, the development of North Korea's missile and nuclear program carries risks for the world order. For several centuries, North Korean leaders have deceived international organizations with tricks, manipulations, and sometimes simple lies. They talked about the development of a peaceful atom and cheap energy for the population. Instead, they were looking for schemes for nuclear weapons. What can stop North Korea from supplying nuclear weapons, for example, to Iran or the Yemeni Houthis? The UN, IAEA, and the US itself still cannot give a definite answer to this.